Okay, good evening, everyone. So let me just tell you in advance that this class will take longer than a half an hour. So those of you who want to go to the Rebbitzins class, feel free to exit, and then, God willing, you could pick up and get the rest of the recording afterwards. But I want to make sure I get everything done in the topic here. So there's a lot of talk about when the shuls will be reopening in Toronto, because you're hearing in the news that shuls are opening in New York and New Jersey and other places, outdoor minions, indoor minions. Many people have been yearning to come back to the shuls. And when I attended a Zoom meeting for the rabbis in the city, a number of rabbis commented that their congregants, quote unquote, people have had it and they can't take it anymore. So I wanted to start this off by, again, sharing an email I received recently, really about a week and a half ago, from one of our good members who asks sincere questions for the purpose of trying to understand and learn things. And that's the spirit it's given, and that's the spirit I respond to it. It is more relating to when we closed and why we closed, and certain questions the person had, which are fair and reasonable. So I think it's best if I explain how we closed. You're going to understand how we're going to reopen. And it goes with the same principles. Okay? So I'm first going to read the email, which is really has a lot of content in it. Then I'll pick the pieces apart and we'll answer that, and then we'll be looking forward. So I'm quoting now the email now. I'm just quoting the email. The following. It was following a Talmud class where we're quoting a Gemara that says there's a positive commandment from the Torah to listen to what the rabbis say. So based on that, he had the following email that was referring back to already 2 months ago when we closed. So I'm going to quote now. This subject is the principle of obeying the big rabbis no matter what. Okay, he meant big. I think he meant great rabbis. They don't necessarily are big, but they're great and scholarly. It is true that at times people might think that the rabbis, as holy as they are still human and do not have the same level of judgment as Hashem. This is why people at times might think they can disagree with the rabbis and set up a minyan in New York State, even though the rabbis were forbidding minyanim. So here is the question that comes to mind. Why should we believe that the rabbis always have the highest degree of knowledge and judgment in secular, in brackets, not religious matters, as compared to other secular specialists? Okay, why do they have the highest degree of knowledge? For example, if an established medical specialist rules one way and the rabbis rule the opposite way, who do we listen to when it is a medical issue? It is true that virtually every secular issue has a spiritual component to it. For example, a medical issue also has a spiritual aspect involved with it. But the rabbis are qualified to rule on the spiritual aspect and not necessarily on the secular part of that issue. And then in brackets, unless they also have in-depth medical expertise as well, like the doctor who's also a rabbi. Here's a fascinating example of what I'm talking about that occurred at the beginning of our pandemic. The Toronto rabbis, so I'll have to clarify what he meant by that statement, ruled that even though other shuls have closed, it's essential for Westmount Shul to remain open as long as it is still legal to do so. Then within 1 or 2 days of this ruling, the ruling was reversed and the rabbis now ruled that Westmount must close. I believe we were told that the explanations of the rabbis did not at first realize the severity of the contagiousness of this virus. But what does this tell us when everyone in the world already knew about the severity of the contagiousness? I personally did not wish to follow the ruling of the rabbis at that time and chose to stay home and join the Westmount minyan via Zoom instead of coming physically to the minyan. So I did follow the spirit of the second ruling of the rabbis a few days in advance of their giving it, but I was actually using my own common sense. Okay, there's a lot to digest and unpack in this email, but it raises a lot of valid questions that I don't want to dodge, and I want to deal with them. So I'm going to respond to all the points, or I'm telling you in advance Many of the points are based on lots of scholarly research that is beyond the scope and time allocation of this forum of me speaking now. And I'm happy to dedicate many other classes to go into more detail explaining each points of these sources, which is creating the assumptions that I'm presenting. So you're going to have to, as they say, trust me that I'm telling you the truth of what the scholarly research is about. And if you need to know more detail, I'm happy to spend another class on that. But to get the whole message in one sitting, we're just going to have to go that way. Okay, also in addition, although our shul reacted differently than other shuls in the past, it's not intimating any being critical of other shuls' responses, as every shul has to act responsibly to their unique needs. So we don't say, well, what the Westmount shul did, that by de facto is criticizing other shuls. That's not, every shul has their unique needs and things they follow, and that's how we're going. So that's how we're going to start. So let's start with the first opening point, the subject of obeying the rabbis no matter what. Okay, that's based on a pasuk in Sefer Dvarim. It's a positive commandment where the Torah says that we must act in accordance with the instructions given you and the ruling handed down to you by the leading rabbis of your generation. You must not deviate from the verdict that they announced to you, either to the right or to the left. What the Torah is basically saying, the rabbis who have the power to make rulings for the Jewish people, you should listen to them. And it says, whatever they tell you, to the right or to the left. And Rashi brings from the Midrashim that says, even if the judge tells you what appears to be your right is your left, or what appears to be your left is your right, you listen to them anyway. How much more so if he actually tells you what is the right, you should for sure listen to him. So basically he's saying, when the rabbis who have this power, as it were, they tell you something, God is saying you should listen to them, even if you don't think they understand what they're doing. Okay, that's what it's saying. Now, we're obviously not talking, when we're defining rabbis, we're talking about rabbis who are adherent to the Torah and extremely dedicated scholars and only have one agenda in mind, as we'll see in a minute. And here's the question: why does the Torah accord them special status? The answer is because really it's according special status to the Creator. That's who gets the special status. The Creator, who gave us a very complex Torah, which is the manufacturer's instructions of how to live in this world in the best way possible. That's what God is. So he gave us those instructions for living based on Torah law, which he gave the power to understand it to the expert rabbis who are very intimately familiar with all the facets of the Torah. They're thoroughly knowledgeable and they're qualified, capable, and required to rule on. The Medrash says that God used the Torah as a blueprint for the entire creation for all 6,000 years of existence. So the more that one is intimately aware of the Torah, the more he's in a position to understand how to deal with the world. And that's why we always looked at the leading rabbis as our guiding light when we're not sure, due to any reasons, such as either lack of Torah knowledge, lack of information, or maybe even personal bias, if we're not sure what to do. So God granted mankind, but meaning the highest echelon of mankind, the rabbis who dedicate their lives to understand the word of God, to make decisions for us based on what they sincerely feel to the best of their ability. And moreover than that, and God then says, and that becomes God's will. These are all explicit statements in the Talmud. If the rabbis come to a decision based on studying God's Torah, that was the instructions for how to live in this world, and God who created the world knew every possible situation that could come up. Before God created the world, he knew there'd be a COVID-19 in the year 5,780, and he'd have to leave us instructions in the Torah to know how to deal with it. Not everybody will understand that at first blush, but the rabbis who are intimately involved with that do understand how to unpack that. So that's point number one. Again, that would require a lot more source backup, but you're just going to rely on what I'm telling you as true. Okay, now this answers one of the points that was raised in the email. He says, is it true that at times people might think the rabbis, as holy as they are still human and do not have the same level of judgment of Hashem? So the answer is no. The rabbis may be human, but the Torah that they imbibe is divine. And that makes them much less fallible than other humans, as smart as other humans may be. They're not as smart as Hashem, but Hashem has given them the divine tools to understand this world better than anyone else. So that answers one of the assumptions that was given. Now, there are scientists in this world, and scientists have a principle of a scientific method through observation. But one thing we need to know, that method of observation is the opposite of the Torah. The Torah came before the world came into creation. God knows what the world he's going to create, and every situation is going to come into being, where scientists are taking from the other side. After the world's here, let's try to figure it out. So they're using their power of observation. Well, that's only as good as the tools that they have to measure things. And clearly we see, as generation passes after generations, often scientists say that as much as earlier scientists legitimately felt they understood certain things, we're finding out they didn't understand a lot of things, and things always are evolving and changing, which is fine. But there is an issue with science. There is a certain arrogance that says if we cannot observe it, it does not exist. That is a problem. Science, by definition, also has had certain agendas. A lot of science came as a reprisal to the very oppressive religious oppression from the Catholic Church that didn't want people to think at all. So it was a reasonable backlash. And in general, many scientists, are just anti-religion, anti-God, because that's their agenda. And certainly scientists have been helpful. They've been helpful to help evolve many advances that help humanity. That's true. But the scientists clearly do not have the monopoly on a divine moral compass, as God does. They can be very smart. They can observe things, but they don't have a divine moral compass. And they're not beyond bias, even though the scientific method says you should not have it, but there's plenty of historical fact to show you much bias has been used in scientific research. It's not taking away from contributions they've made, but their Torah is not a divine Torah. That's clear. This does not change when in conflict with science and doctors' advice. Even if the Torah says one thing and the doctors say the opposite, then we go with what the Torah says. Why? Says in Parshas B'Shalach, Hashem says it clearly, I am your doctor. Now, I'm your doctor. I know the source of all sicknesses. God says, I give doctors permission to heal, but doctors have not replaced God in this world yet. So the fact is, all medical advice and solutions, if one was smart enough in the Torah, could find it all in the Torah if one looks deeply enough, because everything is rooted in the Torah. All what do you call it? Not biology, the other thing, chemistry, all these things are all based on Kabbalah. If you're very well acquainted with Kabbalah and science derives, all the principles of science come out from Kabbalah, from the Torah. You just have to know a lot of Torah to know this. It doesn't come from just, going over the Parsha, obviously. There's a tremendous depth of Torah, deeper than any science that can exist. So Hashem is the doctor. Hashem also provides very holy people who are very much connected to the Torah, something that again is beyond human understanding. God provides them with divine assistance to know what no one else in the world is capable of knowing. And there's countless stories of great rabbis knowing of things that human beings can't know. So most of the time, there's general agreement between science and doctors and the Torah. So there's no problem. If you research long and hard enough, you'll find there's a lot of agreement between science and Torah. But what do we do when there's conflict? Well, there's countless stories, again, I don't have the time, where great rabbis, like the Chazon Ish and others, went against doctors' advice, and almost always, as far as I know, doctors were proven correct at the end of the day. I can't bore you with these stories, where doctors said they should not do a brain surgery, and the Chazon Ish called up the doctor and told the doctor, you will do the surgery exactly like this and it will work, and he did it and it worked. It's many, many stories where rabbis said they don't need a surgery this. How does that work? It works because that's what the Torah can provide. And that doesn't fit into the laws of science. Listen, the whole Jewish people, the nation, existence defies nature. So our continued existence is going to defy it to a certain extent at all. Now, there's an important caveat that we have to say, that not everyone who's called a rabbi is qualified to rule on all subjects in all areas. I would definitely say I am not qualified to go up against another doctor by myself. I'll be the first to admit it. But I have rabbis who are my teachers, who are much more qualified, that I follow from them. Now, historically, we know there's always been a hierarchy in judicial power ranging from the local courts right up to the Chief Justice of the Sanhedrin in Yerushalayim. And there's always many ways to look at an issue with very reasonable positions. And there's been many debates in the Talmud, but a final decision always has to be made, although it can justifiably be applied in different circumstances with different factors. So the point is, in terms of rendering a halacha, a decision must be based on weighing all the issues and then prioritizing which factors take precedence. And at times, the Torah tells us that the halacha is to follow the doctor's opinions when they are really given honestly and accurately. And the rabbis, in this particular situation, do not have a halachic Torah opinion on the matter, which is rare. But then the Torah's halacha says you follow what the doctors say. So we have to analyze the current situation from the past events and how we're going to be looking towards the future. So going back 2.5 months ago, it's hard to believe it's been that long already. And I have to refresh myself and go checking the emails I sent out, because I know there's always lots of fact checkers out there, lots of social media. So there were like 3 important issues that we were dealing with at the time. If we could daven in the shul, if we could learn in the shul, if we could socialize in the shul. Yeah, but there was obviously a different hierarchy of importance. Obviously, learning in the shul is more important than socializing in the shul, and davening in the shul is more important than learning in the shul, and was weighed up against the other issue of pikuach nefesh, the danger to life, or even safek pikuach nefesh, a doubtful danger in life. So we'll go back way to stage 1. And we're talking about early March. Back to stage 1. There were reports of COVID-19 in the beginning. And for Toronto specifically, there was no knowledge of how dangerous it was. So the issue of pikuach nefesh was not so strong and not weighty enough to push off anything. There just wasn't enough factual information out there. So our response at that time was not to change anything. Now, let me explain to you what it means, our response. First, I think myself what I think we should do. Then I consult my mentors who are leading rabbis. I didn't consult all 50 rabbis in Toronto. I consulted 1 or 2 of the top rabbis and speak it out with them, and they understand our shul, and we discuss it, and I give them all the facts. And then it gives me the guidance of what to do. So when we say Toronto rabbis, it's not every single rabbi in Toronto. It's rabbis who have been here for like 40 years, who are the senior rabbis, who give me the counsel. That's how things work. So stage one, there was nothing really to do. There wasn't anything as clear to just stop shul. Stage two, it became clearer into the middle of March approximately. It's getting clearer that things were getting worse in New York, but not yet in Canada and Toronto. The government had not issued any orders at all, nothing from the health department. But people were getting a little anxious and shuls were starting to close down. So again, we consulted and the response was not to change anything unless someone in the shul would have COVID-19. If there was some report that anybody who walked in the shul had it, then we'd have to close down right away. But it was still not felt to be that serious at that point. And remember, as we reflect, there are many states that didn't get hit that hard at all, while some got hit much harder. And there isn't always necessarily the rhyme or reason for it. New York was one situation, Montreal another situation, Ohio another. So, Florida was another. So not everything is going to be the same in every place. So, and there was also another important factor that the power of communal prayer does provide divine protection, which is a very powerful thing, depending on what form of communal prayer you're having. Now, after stage two, stage three came very, very quickly when the COVID-19 was getting much more serious, even though the full extent was not being realized and materializing in Toronto yet either, still not. But when you're closing down sporting events in the States, there's a lot of press, people get very anxious. So there was a lot of fear, which was, although not totally unfounded, but was a bit premature. So our response, we asked again, then we were told we could stay open, but now we have to practice the social distancing, making all the necessary precautions, because it could be something worse. And a very other important point that I don't want to minimize, and it's very much to the praise of the congregation. Praying with proper decorum and praying with devotion, as opposed to talking during prayer and creating behavior that's inappropriate in prayer. There's a big difference what kind of prayer provides you with divine protection, which one doesn't. Coming into a synagogue to talk is not going to help you that much, as opposed to praying. And there were a lot of guarantees from rabbis. If you don't have a shul that doesn't talk, you get a lot of protection. And we know historically that's been true. So that was another important point. And Hashem gives promises that things don't happen if certain things are in place. So at that point, it was really a very tricky, as we'll call, emunah question. How important is davening in a minyan for everybody? And that's not something you can legislate at this point. And at this point, I wasn't telling people they have to come to shul. I wasn't demanding people to come to shul, but I wasn't prepared to close the shul for those who believed in these Torah principles that would protect us. It's no different than many other laws we have that you can't legislate emunah. I know this example you think is not the same, but it doesn't really matter. Working on Chol HaMoed, when you don't really need to work on Chol HaMoed, you won't lose your job. There is really no leniency. But then again, how much emunah do you have that you'll make your parnasa without that week of parnasa or not? You can't legislate emunah. You can't legislate belief, but you don't close a synagogue either. So therefore, and clearly at no point did I feel, or did the rabbis feel, we're putting anybody's lives in danger, because we're following is what is called Daas Torah, the wisdom of the rabbis, 100%. You see, when I ask the rabbis question, I don't pick and choose. So I don't like what this rabbi said today, I don't listen to him. Although many congregants try to take advantage of that, but as a rabbi, I can't do that. So therefore, we were listening 100%. Now, there were a lot of other factors. Our shul was a lot smaller than other shuls. So there were less factors to consider. And at the end of the day, not one person shul contracted the COVID-19 by going to our shul. Did not happen. Okay, then came stage 4, and that came very quickly after stage 3. There was a lot of talk going on because the Westmount shul is the only shul that's open in town. And they felt we were murdering people. I was given all kinds of terrible threats as to what would happen. This came from all kinds of people who do not have any Daas Torah behind them. There was a lot of pressure, and pressure alone would never, you know me, I would never close the shul because of pressure. As I then counseled with Daas Torah again, so they're saying, as much as you aren't intending to produce this, this can be producing a Chilul Hashem that you're not intending to produce. That's causing a lot of Lashon Hara to be out the shul. And there's another halachic concept called Ava. Ava means, even if you're doing something that's proper, but if it can engender a lot of hatred towards Jews, that could cause a lot of collateral damage afterwards, you have to weigh that as an important factor. Now, there's all kinds of places where you consider it, where you don't consider it. But, these things can lead to anti-Semitism and things like that. And at that point, although the counsel I was giving was saying, really, if you kept the shul open, nothing's going to happen to any of your people. But because of these other factors now, and when people start talking a lot of Lashon Hara about your shul, and then people start saying that the Orthodox people want to get us all killed, then as much as that's the furthest thing from the truth, it has to be taken into calculation as to whether now are we gaining enough by keeping the shul open versus all the other damage that is being created by other people. At that point, I was instructed to close. Had that issue not been an issue, then I would have been instructed to keep it open. But when the city councilor calls you and asks you to close the shul, even though at that point I said no, but when I let the rabbis know, I said, well, we're coming to the point now, and you're getting this nasty thing and this nasty thing, and and it comes to a point where people are not going to understand. And the problem is, most people in the world do not understand the value of tefillah b'tzibur. So then we could, unintentionally create a Chilul Hashem. So therefore, we have to close. So that is why we closed, not because everyone in the world realized the indisputable danger. It still was not that dangerous in Toronto. It's not like, oh, now we realize what we should have realized before. That's not why we closed. We closed was aspects of Ava, hatred, Chilul Hashem. You have to know when certain issues become weighted. And therefore, when the person who wrote the email says, well, at the end of the day, I used my common sense. He says, so I did follow the spirit of the second ruling of the rabbis when we to close a few days in advance of their giving it, because I was basically using my common sense. Yes, you're using your common sense, and there's nothing wrong with a person using their common sense. And their common sense will deal with how much emunah that they have. We're not saying the person doesn't have any emunah, but a lot of our common sense depends on a lot of a priori feelings that we have. So you could say the person's common sense caused them to lose a few days of davening, while our listening to Daas Torah enabled the minyan to last a few more days. And every day we stayed open was another day of a main Yehei Shmei Rabbah that can never be brought back again. And nobody was in danger at that time. And never would me or the rabbis give me advice want to put anybody in danger. But you have to have a certain degree of emunah in the system. Then when stage 5 came, and the government ordered all houses of worship to close, which I think was only 2 days later anyway, because then it really began to hit in Toronto. And now it had affected Toronto. And they saw how serious things were at that point. And they verified that in Toronto it's breaking out. And it's at that cusp. then we would have been forced to close no matter what, because another as Jews living in a Jewish country, we must listen to the laws of the country. That's another law, that it's a Golus law, but we have to follow that law. So even if there was no danger at all, we would have to close because the government says to close. And we're not allowed to go against what the government says. Now, since things have been closed and time has passed, it's obviously gotten much more serious. We're talking by the end of March already, early April, but we were long closed by then. Then things really got much worse. And even if the government would have told nobody to close, we would have closed anyway. I can't tell you exactly which day, but as soon as the rabbi would tell me it's time to close it, no matter what the government's saying, we would have closed it anyway. Now, we've entered a stage now. We've entered a stage where the sickness is here. It's not a question, is it going to come? Is it going to kill people? No, it's here. It's killing people in Toronto. And the only reason it hasn't killed so many people, Baruch Hashem, one reason clearly is we practice a lot of social distancing well in advance and listen to what Atzola said well in advance before things happened. And I'm sure Toronto has many schuyot anyway because of all the tzedakah they give. So that's important too. But now that we're in this, and now it's clear this is the state we're in, things change over times. Rulings change when the sickness advances. So we don't say, oh, the sickness could advance, so let's close everything up. Because no, it depends how much it is, and you listen to what the doctors say, and you see the facts on the ground. So now we're in a position where it's here. And if you recall, once I closed the shul, I said, now we have to be very machmir in what? God wants us to take care of our health. I made that very clear. That must have been approximately March 18th, 19th, something like that. I said that now God has clearly said we have to close the shul. We have to be taking care of ourselves. And I said how much we have to take care of ourselves. Get a lot of sleep, a lot of rest, all these things. And I've always been saying the older people should not be going to stores at all and still shouldn't be going to stores. Because now that the quote unquote pandemic is really here, the Magefa is here. So at that point, we have to be very machmir because that became the main mitzvah. And only real essential things had to be done. And honestly, and to that extent, in my own personal life, I inconvenienced myself to abdicate my home so that my daughter and grandchildren could live in that house and that we wouldn't infect anybody. And I've gone out to other pastures, as it were, and but hasn't negatively affected my ability to help the shul. That I couldn't help you the shul anymore by staying in my house in one place or another place. But I felt I had to be machmir to fulfill the mitzvah of staying alive. Although this is not as fun as being in my house. My house is a lot bigger, a lot better, a nice backyard. Okay, so that's where we're at to now. Now let's go forward, returning to the shuls. So now we have to deal really with the opposite scenario now. The opposite scenario is, when do we return? So the same halachic methodology we use to close the shul, we have to use the same methodology to open the shul. And the basic question is, when will it be safe enough that the reason why we close the shul will no longer exist so that we can open the shul? And here's a very important point. Just like you'd never close a shul for the wrong factors, you don't open it up for the wrong factors. Now, Baruch Hashem, we have wonderful Rabbanim in our community who are taking this issue with the utmost of seriousness, both on the legal and medical fronts. And we should really offer a lot of thanks to all the Rabbanim. We have almost 50 rabbis in the city who are very dedicated to help their congregants and the city in general. And they've made all kinds of decisions and guidelines. And I'm not aware of each rabbi's personal decision for his congregation. And of course, their congregation should listen to their rabbi. And I asked them, Mechila, if I suggest anything that they're not in agreement with it. And I'm sure you've seen the letter we sent out Motzei Shabbos. So I'm not going to go over that letter. And with that in mind, I'm going to proceed in the go forward. Let me make something very clear, even though the letter said it clearly, but there's always people who misread letters. That I was in the meeting for 2.5 hours. We knew exactly what the letter was trying to say. Nowhere have the rabbis encouraged outdoor minyanim today. It's not been encouraged. Even though there's others who are doing it, it's not being encouraged. Okay, that's very clear. Outdoors, even 5 people in one lawn, 5 in another. The only thing that is said, well, if you're already doing it, what's not being encouraged, then don't kill yourselves doing it. But not to be misinterpreted that people were encouraging it and suggesting you're not so religious if you're not involved in an outside minyan and this and that. Okay, so now let's state some relevant points going forward now. And again, I can't overemphasize, as technical as this discussion is, I don't want this to be misconstrued that I don't miss each and every one of you. And I would much rather have been at Shalashudas in the dark yesterday. And certainly if I wanted to, I could always go rogue and not tell anybody what I was doing, but we can't do these things. But as much as I want to be with you, there's a halacha that's saying we got to make sure we're all alive a few months from now, when you get back together. So I don't want you to misinterpret my calculated halachic discourse as a lack of feeling everybody's pain. Okay, I just want to make that clear. And again, I'm talking only to my congregation. I don't know who's going to listen to this. I send it out to people of our shul and the very short email list. What goes to other people, I'm not commenting to other people. And I wouldn't recommend you sending it out to other people. It's not for them to know. Point number 1, we are dealing with a clear public danger, which requires individuals to not act in a cavalier fashion, even if it may not affect themselves. Even if they know 100% nothing's going to happen to them. But there is still the situation of what we call safek pikuach nefesh. There is a doubtful situation where people can die, which takes precedence over davening in a minyan learning together. We are in that state now, one we were not in 2.5 months ago. Point number 2, to my understanding, there is no valid scientific evidence that the virus itself has subsided. What do I mean? There are less cases because that's obviously because of the restrictions. But it doesn't mean the virus has subsided. History has shown that epidemics and pandemics tend to stay around for a while, God forbid. And there's no clinical evidence that gives us an excuse to be more lax. And one thing is absolutely clear. Nobody can responsibly say that they know anything about this with certainty. A lot of theory, a lot of things they told us in the beginning are totally wrong now, and then they change back and forth. They all mean well. I don't mean anybody, besides the politicians, the medical people mean well. But that's for sure we know that nobody really knows what's going on. They're learning a little bit. It's coming. But today's guidelines, better yet, the old guidelines are today's death, as we saw in New York, where the governor literally killed people by sending them back. So, and I'm sure he didn't plan on killing people, but that's what he did. So today's guidelines can still be tomorrow's death. So we have to move forward with a default position until there's a reason to change it, that there is a safek pikuach nefesh to individuals who are part of our community, and we cannot relax anything unless we're absolutely sure no one will die from us returning to our shuls. Now, your life has to go on to a certain extent. If nobody goes to work, you don't make any money, the economy totally slows down, and no one has food on it, we'll all die anyway. And there are certain things that are mamish essential. People aren't delivering food, will die. And I'm not minimizing how important davening is and learning Torah, all these things. But the default position is we don't know what's going to happen when people come back. In some places, it's coming back terribly. Other places, it's not. We don't know yet. There's not enough information. That I think we can all agree to. We got to wait for Daas Torah to tell us when and how to return. We are not, here's the critical word, yet at that point, although we can be there relatively soon. And also, there are people who, quote unquote, can't take it anymore. There's no halachic basis to put people's lives in danger because people can't take it anymore. We can't minimize they can't take it anymore, but we can't allow that to have other people's lives be in danger. When we're dealing with a group has a responsibility to make sure that the vulnerable individuals do not get killed, do not die. And although you may be a healthy 30-year-old person and the likelihood of you dying for this is fairly low, but we already know how this spreads. You talk to one person, another person, all of a sudden the person drops on somebody's elderly person and they die. So it's not because of me, it's not because of you, but it's because of that other person that we could indirectly be killing. Okay, point number 3, even if the government says tomorrow that it's okay to return to the shuls, the standards of halacha are more rigorous and more demanding than the government. Just like when it comes to health and food, what do you call the government agencies, the USDA or whatever, Canada, their regimens for healthy meat, it doesn't come close to kosher meats requirements. The government wanting to flatten the curve, understand exactly what it means, is not intended to stop people from dying. It's intended to not overtax the health systems, and they have not denied this. They know more people are going to die. Just don't overwhelm the health system. Now, they may have gone too extreme. I'm not going to get into that. But flattening the curve means we just have not that many people get sick at one time, but we can flatten the curve, keep things going well, knowing that release will kill people. But that is their moral decision. And there's a lot of factors they make involved in that. And as non-Jews, they can make those decisions. But as halachic Jews, we have a much higher standard than that. And we, as Torah Jews, do not allow for people to potentially die, even if the government is comfortable with that. There's another point. Sometimes, even though the halacha would say that in theory the law should be a certain way, but then they'll say, but in practice, we shouldn't do it. There's all kinds of examples in the Gemara. It says, halacha is like this, but in practice, we're not going to do it because people will either misunderstand the halacha or abuse the halacha. And this will be another example. Even if we'll say, let's even say that doctors are right. Let's just say, and the government is right. And we could go back into the shuls with 10 people in the shul, social distancing. And mamish with a mask and everything, and really let's even say we don't even know this, that nobody would die. But why do you think the rabbis had to send out this letter? Why do we have to send out this letter? People were going out on porches, and they weren't congregating 10 at a time. And they were told all these things about social distancing, and they're still making kiddushes afterwards. So you know how it is, give them an inch, they take a mile. So even if we would know that, but honestly, and I don't mean this negatively to the Jewish people, but we have a natural tendency to be lax in these situations. We're Jews, we gravitate to each other. It's second nature. And all the people having these outdoor minyanim, you think they're having masks? No. So therefore, even if you say that in theory, 10 people could be in the shul together with masks and social distancing and all these things, and maybe in 5 shuls and 10 shuls they will, but in 10 shuls they won't, that means we'd be indirectly involved in other people being dying. That's what it means, all Jews are one. Fascinating historical note. Rabbi Akiva Eger, one of the greatest Torah sages in his generation. There was a terrible cholera epidemic in 1831 and 1832. Obviously, their knowledge of medicine wasn't nearly what we know now, but people were dying like crazy in Poland and Germany. And it was coming up to Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. And if you look in the response to there, he has like 20, 25 points. I don't know all the historical details, but I know what he wrote and what he did. And it came to a point where they said, listen, we can only have half the people. And who doesn't come to Shul on Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur? And he said, we only can have half the people in the Shul at a time. We'll have to do a lottery system. You have to make sure that wherever anybody sits, there's an empty seat on both sides. And by lottery, either half the people will be in Shul on Rosh Hashanah and the other half will be on Yom Kippur. But that's not the point I want to make here. Now, Rabbi Akiva Eger was a giant in Torah. And whatever he said, no one's going to argue on him. He was the final statement of law for Jews in Europe and Germany. And then he wrote that there must be German and Polish police officers in every shul and not let anyone in who doesn't have the right ticket to be in the right place. Now that's after all the incredible awe and honor and respect that Rabbi Akiva Eger had. He insisted on police to supervise. Why? Because he knew Jews wouldn't follow it. So now, point 5, even though many things have already begun to be relaxed by the government, and many more are going to continue to be relaxed, and some are not essential services, but we as Jews have different values and needs and different priorities. We say to see them, they get up and we get up. They go to work, we go to work. We go to work to get Chai Olam Haba, and they go to the pit of destruction. What a non-Jewish world has to decide how a non-Jewish world goes forward. And I'm not criticizing the way they're doing it. They do what works for them. It's not my concern. And there's a lot of factors. I understand why they felt going to the LCBO is a very essential service. I really felt so. And getting marijuana is very essential because otherwise people will be killing each other. Better get drunk and go to sleep and forget about it. I understand it. And in a non-Jewish world, I respect that opinion. And if they're not going to go to the beaches and they're not going to go here, they're not going to go there, it's going to be chaotic. But Jews live for a different calling. And to have a line such as, well, if you can go to the liquor store, why can't you go to Shul? Well, honestly, they don't care if some people die, as long as they can have most people happy at the liquor store. It's just basic economics. It's basic control of people to avoid, and I'm not saying they're wrong, but that's their moral compass. We have a different moral compass. Our value for life is so, what happened? The government decides, we can pull the plug on certain people. You know how much we're fighting that we should have, those living wills. As well-intentioned as a secular world is, they're going to cut your grandmother off and have her die if they don't think she's worth living. And we know halacha does not allow that. So I understand that they have their values, but just because that's their values, is that the reason why I feel I have to be in Shul? Is that going to be the driving force to want to be in Shul? Non-Jews make decisions for what works best for them. Let them. But Jews have to make decisions that work best for them. Point number 6. There's a difference in halacha between what's called a passing danger, like the Spanish flu, let's say, and a permanent danger, let's say like polio. In other words, there's a danger, it's going to hit us for a while, but then it's going to leave. And we're not going to see much of it again. Or no, this is a new reality of danger that we're going to have to learn to live with. We don't know what this is yet. Now, if we would know that this is going to be a permanent thing and we're just going to have to live with it, okay, then we cannot forever be in our shuls. You can't just be that way forever. That's just like polio was something that what we have to find a way to cure, but we just have to we couldn't just close the whole world down. But to the extent that we don't know this is a permanent thing, and it could be a passing thing, so what will it hurt us to wait to open the shuls? Is it worth the risk? See, it depends. There's something called chazaka. When you're the chazaka, the status quo was health, and I want to change it to danger, then there's got to be enough evidence that we have to be concerned enough there's a doubt. But once it's certainly dangerous, we're not satisfied with enough to just shift out of it. We've got to be a lot clearer on that. And nobody knows for sure what kind of danger is this. This is something that's going to stay, because since we've done the social, it was Baruch Hashem, we should do it. I mean, it's different opinions. But Baruch Hashem, not as many people have died, but when you're going to relax it, do you really know what's going to happen yet? And they're going to relax it slowly, but we do it slowly, but not everybody follows the rules. So therefore, in conclusion, and again, this is in consulting with other rabbis, and I've really done a lot of research on this subject. We're not yet ready to return to shul in any fashion. So let's not make the same mistake, but in reverse. By starting outdoor or indoor minyans now, and only when the rabbis finally say it's okay. When the rabbis will eventually say it's okay, then fine, but not yet. Even if the government will tell us tomorrow that we can open up the shuls tomorrow, I would not recommend it yet. Even if so many people are getting back to normal, we still have to be extra certain. And everyone has to ask themselves the following question. Do I want to be back in shul because it is the will of Hashem, or is it because I want things to be back to normal? Or is it because we want to be in shul for shvus? Many people are so focused on just getting back to normal. But was the old normal that good for many shuls? And even when we do open the shuls, and there's going to have to be all kinds of plans and strategies. I just saw shuls in New York. They said they're opening up, and they gave a whole list of things they got to do. A shopping list. Not more than 10 people in a room, and everyone has to have masks on, and everyone has to be 8 feet away, and blah, 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 and all these things, which of course you have to have. I've not yet seen any spiritual plans about improving the decorum, because we all understand, maybe not in our shul, but in general, it's not me. Every week you look in the Matzav, you look in the Jewish papers, there's always big rabbis say, we got to stop the talking in shul, stop the talking in shul. I'm saying, is it just to get back to normal? That's we're in a rush to get back to normal? Or we want to just do what Hashem wants us to do. And Hashem wants us that nobody should die, chas v'shalom. And Hashem wants that we come back to the shuls. It's not the same way it was before. So, and if we opened anyway, there will be a day we will open. I'm sure we will. We will open one day. But for sure, the first beginning will be on a very limited basis. And once that, it's as good as if the shul's not open anyway. What are you going to do? Let 10 people come in? Good. Who are going to be the 10 people? Rabbi, you decide. I ain't going to decide who my enemies are. Someone has a right more than somebody else. And in all these minyanim, it's like it's going to be fast and in and out and this and that. And I don't know if I want to come back to a shul where it's fast and in and out, where I'm davening worse than I'm davening at home. I don't know if that's the best solution either. And I don't know, and they're not going to let rabbi speak and this and that, so you're not going to get any inspiration, and everyone's going to be nervous and uptight. I don't know if that's how you want to open up a shul. So I'm going to let you know, as far as Shavuos is concerned, I do not plan on going to shul, regardless of what the government says. Unless there is such a 360-degree turn, or 180 rather, of the most optimal circumstances, which I doubt is going to happen in the next 4 days. I just don't see it. And again, even if it would happen, we could only allow 10 people. So what kind of minyan would that be? So it's not like you even opened anyway. To quote Rabbi Akiva Eger again, the loose translation, he gave all those guidelines. And he says, one who transgresses the guidelines is liable with his life. Additionally, they're responsible for bringing tragedy by tripping others, and he will ultimately have to answer before God, and therefore be scrupulous and careful, for it's equal to murder. So, with that in mind, the time will come, Rabbi Isai, soon enough, in a few weeks or even a month. We've survived until now. We're a very resilient people. Baruch Hashem, so much chesed has gone on in this shul and other shuls in the last 2 months. Everybody's worried about everybody. Everybody's trying to take care of everybody. Baruch Hashem, we are learning more Torah now than we ever did in the history of our shul. Many, many marriages are a lot better after these 2 months. And there's some that are worse. I'm not going to deny it. But I got much less calls about Shalom Bayis than I thought I was going to get. Baruch Hashem, it's to your credit. We're very resilient people. We're a very resilient shul. And we'll be just fine when we come out at the right time. Now, I know I've spoken way too long, but I don't think I couldn't have done it any shorter. And I would strongly suggest that when the recording goes out, you listen to it again, because I said a lot of points. I'm very appreciative that you held back. I'm sure there's certain questions you wanted to ask, and not everything is necessarily explained so clearly. So I'm very happy you send me some emails or call me up afterwards, and I'll be happy to clarify points. I'm happy to dedicate a few more classes to explain certain points a lot clearer, and I'll be happy to answer them. But right now, so not to have any doubts, because I'm sure, I'm telling you, in another day or two, Premier is saying the synagogues can open, and everyone's going to start writing. Remember, it's not up to the Premier, it's not up to the doctors. It's up to what the will of Hashem is, and we faithfully trust that the advice we've been getting till now, Baruch Hashem, we're all here, and we're all happy, and we're all safe. And it will continue the same way, and we'll grow in our Torah. We'll have an amazing Shavuos. We'll feel a Kabbalah Torah like we never felt before, even if we're not in the shul. And this will be a great merit and a schus for all of us until the time is right for us to come. As Shlomo Melech said, Davar be'ito ma tov. Something in its time. There can be nothing better than that. I wish that that time will come exactly when Hashem wants it to come. Thank you very much for listening. I appreciate it. And I'd be very happy for you to send me any feedback, and I'll definitely respond to that another time. Have a good night. And we still have a Rambam class in about a half an hour.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Sei gesund.